disappointed.
I don't see like any kind of difference so far.
Try harder or you're going to lose your job.
Tell it like it is. Our Labour's voters lost. It's been a difficult year for Keir Starmer. That would be an understatement. He's had a tough 12 months and a week of shambles for the Prime Minister. This morning, we'll hear from you. We've gathered together a group of people who voted Labour last July to give their verdict on the last 12 months.
The country's a mess, so we have to give them some time.
Well, that's some of the public. Here are our politicians today. Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, is here, and Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor for the Conservatives. Before we do anything else, I must just ask, this week was a shambles for Labour, wasn't it?
No, it's not been the best week that we've ever had, but I think we go on from here, we know what we need to do, and that's what matters.
Oh, we'll hear that's going to be a bit later in the programme. Did it give you a horrible feeling of the fear, like the days of Tory chaos, Mel Stride?
Well, I think we've had a whole year of chaos and underperformance. That's the problem. So in a sense, it was particularly bad, but nothing entirely new.
OK, well, a chaos off. We'll have that later in the programme. After dozens of people were arrested yesterday after a protest in support of the newly banned group Palestine Action, the country's top cop, the head of the Met, Sir Mark Rowley, is here. Morning, and our team at the desk for the next 60 minutes, Daniel Kebede, head of the National Education Union, the broadcaster Susanna Reid, and James Harding, editor of The Observer. Let's start by what is making the news this morning, as we always do. And there's a bumper front page on the Sunday Times suggesting Labour ditching the welfare squeeze has killed off the prospect of axing the two-child limit on some benefits. What will Bridget Phillipson say to that? It has the Met Chief, who's also with us, calling for mega forces in England. And another Reform MP becomes no longer a Reform MP. James McMurdoch is out of the party for now after questions over COVID loans. The Sunday Telegraph says the Tories have a new policy of stopping foreign nationals getting sickness benefits. And The Observer, James Harding's paper, claims the bestseller and movie based on a true story, The Salt Path, is in fact a pack of lies. The Mirror and The Sun both splashed, though, on the funeral of the Liverpool striker Diogo Jota in Portugal yesterday. That's been a huge story this week. And here at the BBC, we are leading with the story of the desperate search for survivors of the floods in Texas, which have killed 50 people, including 15 children. Well, welcome to our panel here at the desk with me for the next hour. And we're going to spend most of the 60 minutes talking about the government, a shambolic week, and the last 12 months. Daniel, firstly to you, did you think it was going to be like this?
I thought that we had change on the horizon, and I think if you ask many people now, do they feel like they are experiencing change, the answer would be a resounding no.
And why do you think that's happened?
Well, I think austerity is ended in deeds, not words. And whilst we've had a government say that they're bringing austerity to an end, that's not been the experience of most people. If we take our schools, for example, schools are going to have to find 1% efficiency savings this year because of a partially funded pay award. And after 14 years of Conservative austerity previously, that is something that education cannot bear.
Susanna, do you think people had unrealistic expectations this time last year?
I don't know that voters had unrealistic expectations. I think that they read a manifesto which on practically every page said stop the chaos. And they then expected the chaos to stop. And unfortunately, this first year of Labour government feels like it has been chaotic, and nothing more chaotic than another U-turn in the week of the one-year anniversary, and a Prime Minister who can't even persuade his own backbenchers to back what he and the Chancellor want to do in terms of the economy. It's supposed to be securonomics. I mean, the Chancellor herself couldn't have looked more insecure at Prime Minister's questions.
And of course, her reasons for crying, the government has said that there were personal matters, but certainly that image of Rachel Reeves in tears is one that many people will really, really remember, and it might be hard for her to move on from that. But James, you've followed the fortunes of many governments going up and down. Do you think that what we've seen in this first 12 months is a fundamental difficulty, that this government is never going to sort of find a mojo, or is it teething trouble?
So I think the good news is we're not at the end of the first year and there's a risk of complacency. There's no chance that they're sitting in Downing Street thinking this is all going brilliantly. But I think sometimes these really hard weeks turn out to be the most helpful ones. And this week, I suspect they've had to reckon with who are we, how do we communicate that with the public, and what do we want to do with power? And I think you're exactly right to say, I think it is fundamental. I think, Daniel makes the point about austerity. Actually, the real question is, are you a government that's going to try and deliver growth, prosperity, and therefore the revenues that can drive public services, or are you going to live by a set of values which may be unaffordable? Who are we? How do we use power? That's the question.
And that tension is so often there for Labour leaders, isn't it? What do they want to do? Things that make the party feel good, or things that have a chance of really improving the country? We'll be back with all three of you a bit later in the programme. And you all know it by now. Politics moves at 100 miles an hour in all sorts of directions. So it is far too early to say if this government has succeeded or failed. But it's not too early to take stock. And you have asked us to do just that this weekend. One of you, Terry from Birmingham, good morning, Terry, I hope you're watching today, got in touch. He said, I'd love to see a one-year scorecard. What was it a year ago and what is it now? So, Terry, we got to work. Let's go through some of the things that you asked about. Let's start with the rise in the cost of living, inflation, which we all remember was such a huge problem for the last Conservative government. It is higher than July last year, but way down from record peaks a few years ago. Sticking with the economy, interest rates, which hit borrowers so hard, have come down several times. So the average two-year fixed rate mortgage is now 4.19%. What about NHS waiting lists? Well, with billions of pounds of extra spending, the overall list in England is starting to fall. It's now at 7.4 million. But small boat crossings have gone the other way, going up to more than 43,000 in the last year, despite Labour's promise to smash the gangs. When it comes, though, to staff in hospital and schools, there are more teachers in secondaries in England, but the overall total has gone down a little, while there are 4.5% more clinical staff in the NHS in England. So overall, a patchy picture, a year since Keir Starmer walked into Downing Street as Prime Minister for the first time. Well, those were Terry's scorecards. Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, is with us. We can't look at every single indicator, of course, but I just wonder, your colleague Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, said he'd give you 7 out of 10. What would you give yourselves as a government?
I think I'd be inclined to agree with Johnny. I think that's about right. I think we have made enormous strides forward in a lot of areas. Of course, there's more to do. And of course, we hear what voters are telling us, that they voted for change, they're impatient for change, they want to see it and feel it in their communities. But if you just take, for example, what we've done in education in the last year alone, new free breakfast clubs, a big childcare expansion with more primary-based nurseries and more of that to come. And also the biggest expansion in a generation of free school meals eligibility to children on universal credit. Those are all really important steps forward that will make a huge difference to children and their life chances. And what I'm setting out today around revitalised family services, building on the legacy of Sure Start, one of the proudest achievements of that last Labour government, with our Best Start family hubs that will make sure that our youngest children get the support they needed. I said when I became Shadow Education Secretary and Education Secretary that early years was my #1 priority, and we're holding to that, and I'm delivering on that.
And we'll talk about that a bit later, but you've given yourself 7 out of 10, like your colleague Jonathan Reynolds. Let's listen to what voters give you. This is a group of voters in Kent. Now, they came from the 2 constituencies of Gravesham and Dartford. They were selected by the political research group More in Common. They gathered together voters who'd all backed Labour this time last year in that part of the country. Both were won by Labour with huge swings, and Luke Trill from More in Common, not me, was asking the questions.
Ups and downs.
Disappointment. Disappointed.
Unorganised. Pragmatic but tentative.
Hello everyone, my name is Luke. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about what's been happening in politics and getting some of your views on that.
I've always been a Labour supporter. My parents were Labour, and I think as an adult I expected much more from them. Would have expected Labour to have pulled themselves together sufficiently.
Everything that they promised and said that they were going to do, nothing's really come of it as of yet.
And is there anything particular that they've done that's disappointed?
Immigration is a big thing for me.
I feel like at the moment it's patching things up. That's why I look at this first year as
it's not really the year to sort of push the ideologies, push those big ideas. It's kind of, let's sort of shore things up, let's steady the ship almost.
I think a lot of things that were promised, even if I voted for them, were never going to be possible. I don't think any political party is honest.
I don't see like any kind of difference so far. And what I have just come across is like, you know, they're blaming like the previous party about like those kind of things.
Can we turn to the man in charge, Keir Starmer, and ask about how you think he is performing as Prime Minister?
I feel that he has a bit of a yes man at the beginning and has to promise certain things. But again, maybe it's too soon to kind of see. A little bit more time, he might be able to live up to that.
My opinion on Keir Starmer. I feel a little bit lied to. He changed, obviously, the winter fuel payment was going to stop. Now he's gone back on what... I don't know, I don't have much confidence.
Going to the more recent, you know, the PIP, changing that, and then what happened, you know, within his own party, that was worrying. Again, another U-turn. And because it's more recent, it pushes that idea that there is little direction, I guess.
Do you have an opinion about Rachel Reeves and how good a job she's doing?
I think she's trying her best. I do think they blame the Conservative for all the problems they're having now, but that was always going to be the case. Her crying at the Commons the other day, and Keir Starmer didn't even notice, but everyone else did. And I know it was for personal reasons, and she should be able to keep that to herself, but sometimes I think, is it the pressure getting to her?
I think of my personal life, I can't turn anything around in a year that's significant and that is in a mess, right? The country is a mess, so we have to give them some time.
Is there anyone else that you think might be doing a good job right now or could do a good job in that role?
I really like Reform.
And what do you think about their leader?
Yeah, I like him. I didn't, but it was I'm a Celebrity that turned my head for Nigel, not gonna lie. I really saw a different side to him, and I think he's very misunderstood.
I think he's more relatable to the people, to the average person, where some politicians at the present seem far removed. They're so in another world because they're usually public school educated. They can't relate to the average person.
Nigel Farage was.
Oh, sorry.
Public school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, whereas actually Keir Starmer is working class, but he does present that. So Nigel Farage puts on this image of being one of the people, but actually he went to private school.
Okay, that's interesting.
What about, how many of you know who the Conservative Party leader is? Just a quick show of hands.
I can't remember. I know.
About Haas? About Haas?
I can't say her name.
I think she's quite argumentative.
Imagine you are Keir Starmer's employer. What would be the sort of one sentence which would sum up your appraisal?
Keep up what you're doing, but I feel like you need some direction now because I feel like you're being attacked.
Try harder or you're going to lose your job.
I need to see some evidence from now going forward.
Show more evidence of your work and communicate better.
Disappointing, you're fired.
Well, Bridget Phillipson, disappointing, try harder or you'll lose your job. Disappointing, you're fired. What goes through your mind when you hear that?
I mean, that does chime with what I've heard from voters across the country. I was knocking on doors in Sunderland in recent days, and I hear that same frustration from voters, which is they voted for change, they want to see that change, both in terms of cost of living, you know, in their communities and their lives. And we hear that, we recognise that. And whilst I do think we've achieved a lot in that first year, there have undoubtedly been challenges along the way. We haven't got everything right, of course we haven't. And now, going into the second year, it's about how we take that forward, how we really drive through and deliver on what I hear loud and clear people want.
But it's not about people just saying, oh, well, we thought there was a bit more change. These are people who voted Labour last year. And some of them are saying, you're fired, try harder, do more. I see no difference so far. I mean, is there a danger you're a bit complacent if you just say, well, yeah, that's what we hear on the doorstep, it'll all be fine, we'll just get on with it?
I mean, there's absolutely no complacency on my part. I mean, you know, It is undeniable that we had a really tough inheritance on lots of fronts, but I hear
and
from
plenty
voters...
of voters say they've had enough of you blaming the previous lot.
Yeah, and I think it is important to put it in context, but I also hear that a year on, what people want is delivery. They want change. They want to see that difference in their lives. All of us across government, right from the top, know that we have to demonstrate the difference that we're making. And as I said just at the start of the programme, we have done amazing things in lots of ways, but not enough. Of course, not enough. But we've laid the foundations for how we're going to take that forward, whether that's with the waiting lists that are coming down in the NHS, getting more police back on our streets, and also people feeling better off. Because a lot of this, I do think, fundamentally comes down to the fact that lots of families right across the country are still continuing to struggle with the cost of living. And the practical, tangible changes that we're delivering over the course of the next year, whether that's through new free breakfast clubs, expanding free school meals, cutting the cost of a school uniform, increasing the national minimum wage.
But if we look at the last 7 days, you say you've been busy fixing the foundations. This week, you smashed away some of the bricks of one of the plans that you did have, which was sorting out some of the welfare system. Because of your own party, Keir Starmer was forced to ditch his plan to squeeze some welfare payments. He was not on top of what was happening in Parliament. Public sentiment is against you. Do you acknowledge that actually it's not just people being impatient? Some people are incredibly disappointed, and the Prime Minister's authority was brutally damaged this week by your own side.
Look, I'm not going to pretend that it hasn't been a tough or a challenging week. I'm not going to pretend that for one moment. There is an important need to reform the social security system. It's not working as it should. It's been broken and we've got to reform it.
And your efforts
but I
to
acknowledge,
do that
I'd be the first to acknowledge,
are now out the window.
But I'd be the first to acknowledge that both in the pace and the nature of what we set out, we didn't get it right. We've listened, we've reflected on that. But we do need to reform the system we've got. It is, I think, unconscionable that we've got so many young people that have effectively been written off by this country. 1 in 8 young people not earning or learning. That tells us something really serious about the shape of our country.
But
and that's why investment in our schools, investment in our skills.
But this week has told us something very serious about your party and the Prime Minister's authority, which is when push came to shove, Keir Starmer did not have the backing of his own party, despite his enormous majority. He didn't have the authority to make those changes that he wanted to do. And you've just explained why the reform is so needed.
Reform is needed, but what the Prime Minister has said, and what I also believe, is that what we set out, we pushed ahead too fast. We didn't listen enough to people, including, I would say, including to lots of people who had concerns about the nature of that change. And that's why, with the review we're undertaking, that Sir Stephen Timms will lead for us, we'll make sure that the further reforms we set out to the social security system ensure that those who can work are able to work and get the support that they need. But critically, those who are the most vulnerable, who need ongoing, continuing support, get that too. But I don't believe we can write people off in the way that had been the case in the past.
But this is exactly the same script that people used when you were pushing ahead with the reform, and you've had to slam the brakes on, which has undoubtedly really shaken people inside the Labour Party's confidence in Keir Starmer's ability to get things done. All that talk of radicalism, all that talk of rewiring the state, when push comes to shove, he didn't have the authority to push it through its party. What are you going to do differently in these next 12 months? What's going to change?
So I think there's a number of things. Firstly, reflecting on what we've just heard from voters there, people want to see change. So we've really got to press ahead and demonstrate the change that people voted for. That's why what I'm setting out today is a part of that, making sure that in every local area, in every council area, young parents have got access to the support that they need. So at the earliest possible point in our children's lives, there's really high quality access to early years education and childcare, to health services, practical things like breastfeeding support, health visiting support, family and parenting support. We know that it's a struggle at the moment for lots of people. This is a big investment, and it's the kind of change that you only get with a Labour government. No Conservative or Reform politician would be sat here today saying that we're investing £500 million of extra money into Best Start family hubs.
Well, hang on a minute.
No politician would be saying or doing that.
Well, hang on a minute, but I want to read people what was in the Conservative manifesto on family hubs. We have already delivered family hubs in 75 local authorities. We will deliver a family hub in every local authority in England. And the Conservatives had put £300 million towards this. You're putting 500 million a few years later. We all know how high inflation has been. This is a continuation of exactly what the Conservatives were doing, Bridget Phillipson.
What the Conservatives did in 2010 was to...
We're not talking about
no,
2010.
this is relevant. This is relevant. They came in and they cut a scythe through the Sure Start programme, one of the proudest achievements of that last Labour government that has been demonstrated to make a real difference to children's academic attainment, to reduce hospitalisations and to better support families. That was one of the first things they did. And then they came along later and put a bit of extra money in. It wasn't enough. We are going further. We are revitalising family services. We'll make sure that it's properly joined up with a digital offer alongside that for parents and with a massive expansion in early years education. It is fine to promise these things in a manifesto, but not have any mechanism of delivering it. And like everything that they said in that manifesto, there was no plan to make it happen. This Labour government is putting in place the long overdue support that families have been crying out for such a long time. Communities that were left behind, cast adrift and forgotten by the Conservatives.
You care very passionately about it. We can see that, but it is absolutely pertinent to point out this is exactly what the Conservatives had started in the 2020s.
And it's absolutely pertinent for me to say that they wrecked Sure Start. They absolutely destroyed it, and we will rebuild it.
And that is absolutely legitimate for you to say that, but also legitimate to point out that to the audience that was a decision made in 2010. And one of the things we heard strongly from that focus group is that people sometimes feel they've had enough of you pointing out things that happened in the past. Let's talk.
And I'm talking about the future, and I'm talking about what we're doing today.
So let's talk about other things that you might do. Because when you speak to charities about what would really make a difference to families who are struggling, they nearly all say, lift the cap on families with more than 2 children getting some benefits. Now, that is something you said previously is on the table, but it is also something that is looking less likely because you ditched your welfare plans this week. There's just maybe not going to be the money for it. Is it right to assume, as some people have, and as Downing Street has briefed some of the Sunday newspapers this morning, that the idea of getting rid of the 2-child benefit cap is now dead?
We're looking at every lever, and we'll continue to look at every lever to lift children out of poverty. It will be the moral mission of this Labour government to lift children out of poverty. It's why the Prime Minister set up the Child Poverty Task Force that I co-chair with the Work and Pensions Secretary. It's why we're not waiting around for that final report, because we're investing already with a big expansion in free school meals eligibility that will lift 100,000 children out of poverty and will help 500,000 children.
But the Chancellor has been very explicit.
This does come at a cost. It does come at a cost. And that's why, in keeping with our fiscal rules, we do need to make sure that we have a strong foundation for the economy. We make sure we get this right. These ultimately will be matters that the Chancellor has to consider right across the board. But it's not just, this is an important consideration, and I have heard what charities and others have to say on this topic, but that is not the only way that we are supporting and will support families. The Best Start family hubs, expansion of free school meals,
but to be
free
clear
breakfast
about
clubs, childcare expansion, skills training.
But are the chances of getting rid of the 2-child cap now diminished because this week the party failed to back the Prime Minister's hoped for reforms on welfare? So simply there is less money around.
But the decisions that have been taken in the last week do make future decisions harder. But all of that said, we will look at this collectively in terms of all of the ways that we can lift children out of poverty. I came into politics to make sure that where a child comes from doesn't determine what they can go on to achieve. The mission that we're driving across government is about making sure that background doesn't equal success, doesn't determine success. Because for far too many children in our country, the family that they're born into, the town that they're born into, will absolutely determine their life chances. So dealing with child poverty, bringing down those numbers, making sure that all children can achieve and thrive is absolutely what we do every single day.
And one of the areas that I know we've talked about it before in the studio, we know our viewers care deeply about it. One of the areas that you're also looking at is how to improve the system for kids with special needs. Now, there are nerves in your party. MPs I've spoken to are worried about the reforms that you're looking at. And they are worried potentially that you might phase out or diminish what are called EHCPs. So when a family is trying to get extra support for their kid, the sort of official legal document that gives them a right to extra support. Will you rule out getting rid of those EHCPs?
What I can say very clearly is that we will strengthen and put in place better support for children. But I do just need to put this in the wider context of where we are at the moment, because this is, as you say, a complex and sensitive area where I've been spending a lot of time listening to parents, to disability rights groups, to campaigners and to others, and to colleagues across Parliament as well, because it's important to get this right. Now, it is tough. And there's a reason that the Conservatives ducked this and didn't look at it properly. We'll be setting out a schools white paper in the autumn that will set out wider reform. And it is important. I mean, I understand for parents having access to that EHCP and what that brings is incredibly important.
But will you rule out getting rid of them?
I will make sure that every child gets the support maintained that they need.
But that's not
actually,
the question.
it's about
getting rid of these things.
It is about better and earlier support. But I should say, we're not waiting for that schools white paper. That will set out the further long-term direction. But we're investing more already in staff training around special educational needs and disabilities. We're investing more in creating the places that are needed. We invested more at the budget and at the spending review into the high needs budget for special educational needs. So there's more money going in. More money alone is not the answer, because I think even parents of children with EHCPs know that they've often had to fight really hard to get that. It's too adversarial, it takes too long, it's too bureaucratic. So I do think we need to just take a step back and think about how do we build a better system that is more timely, more effective and actually maximises support,
and when those plans
including
are ready,
for children with complex needs.
We'd love to have you back and we can talk about it in more length because it's a hugely important issue. But we are now very short of time. But I must just ask you, politically, you've had a very rough ride, and there's been disappointment among many of your voters, and also disappointment on the left of the Labour Party. So much so that it looks like there's going to be a new party. Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana and a few other people. There've been a bit of confusion about whether or not it's actually off the ground, but polling suggests they could take as much as 10% of your vote. Are you worried about that?
It's up to them what they do. I think, as you say, it's been a slightly confused picture. I think what I'm interested in working on every day is how we actually demonstrate the difference that a Labour government makes to people's lives, and that will be what we're judged on come the next election.
But are you worried, though, about the threat from the left? Because a lot of your colleagues in the last 12 months have been quite spooked by the threat from reform, and we heard in our focus group that many voters are attracted to Nigel Farage as a possible leader. They are curious about him. And there does seem to be, on the other side of the fence, something that's sort of gone wrong between Keir Starmer's leadership and the left of the Labour Party. You're not worried about the sort of progressive side of things, or people going to the Greens, perhaps?
Look, I think when it comes to the formation of a new party, some of those involved, I think, checked out of the Labour Party quite a long time ago. Now, it's for them to forge their way forward. But what will determine the next election is whether people really see in their lives, in their families, in their communities, that difference a Labour government has brought. That's true whether you sit towards the left on the political spectrum or on the right. And it's the change and the delivery that really matters in the years to come.
OK, that is the big question. Bridget Phillipson, thank you for being with us this morning, as ever, and answering our questions. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Well, remember, we want to know what you think. You know that we ask your questions. And Terry, you had your moment this morning, so get in touch. Email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk. The WhatsApp number is there for you too, 08000 282 161. And if you're social media inclined, the hashtag is BBC Laura Kay. Susanna, firstly to you, what did you make of Bridget Phillipson this morning? I mean, it's a tough wicket to defend after everything they've had this week, let alone in the last year.
And you could tell she's on fighting form, but also clearly taking account of what your viewers panel said, which I thought was really significant. As Bridget Phillipson, senior government minister, says, voters need to feel material difference in their lives. And after a year, those voters represent those who do not feel a material difference. We know that inflation is above target. That's just general inflation, food inflation, which is, of course, a key part of the cost of living. You know, you can be told, well, things are getting better and we're making life better for you and cost of living is really important. But if it's costing you more to buy the things that you normally buy, doesn't feel like things are getting better. We've also seen these huge U-turns on issues that we know are big to voters. So we had billions put into defence, but apparently pensioners had to pay for it. And it took months and months for the government to finally U-turn on the winter fuel allowance. And the reason that they said they did it was they'd suddenly found more money, whereas we know that the reason that they did it was because it was massively unpopular. So material things that make a difference to voters, the government are getting it wrong. And I was really struck by one of your panel who said, Well, I quite like the look of Nigel Farage because I saw him on I'm a Celebrity, and I thought, well, perhaps Sir Keir Starmer needs to go on to I'm a Celebrity,
Or maybe Strictly, Susanna.
or maybe Strictly, in order for voters to know who he is, because the words that kept coming out of their mouths was, I don't know, I don't know who
and that
he is.
has been, for Keir Starmer, that has been a kind of, that's been an issue all along, actually, hasn't it? Even I remember when he ran as opposition leader, and that we all, there were earnest columns about who is he really, what does he stand for? Actually, perhaps to all of you, do you, as a prominent figure on the left wing, you're not affiliated to the Labour Party at your union, but you're a prominent figure on the left, could you tell us what Keir Starmer actually stands for?
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it? I don't think I could articulate
Really?
it. It's very much continuity status quo. And you have to, we were hearing about people being impatient for change. You have to really put this into context. If you're around my age, around the 40 mark, you entered the labour market around the financial crisis, and all you know is decline. You are locked out of housing, childcare is massively expensive, so you're locked out of having a family, and people know what their parents had, and they had free education and so on. So this idea that people are impatient for change, well, we've just experienced decline. And the real issue I've got is I don't think government realise the scale of the crisis, and that is why people are looking elsewhere. What we absolutely need to see is taxes on wealth. We've seen a huge growth in billionaire wealth since the 90s, and we need to see taxes on wealth rather than trying to pick the pockets of pensioners or going for welfare cuts.
And wealth taxes are something that people often call for, and then the Treasury look at the numbers and say, well, it doesn't really stack up. But James, I just wonder, listening to Daniel about this sort of massive generational challenges, is it Labour's fault?
So I don't, forgive me, I don't entirely agree with the pile-on. I actually think that people know a lot about Keir Starmer. They know he's a person of high integrity. They know he works hard. He's seriously competent. I think that there's a big argument about how does he communicate to people. These are the things I really care about, and there's a relationship between that and what we're doing in government. But I thought, Laura, the conversation you had with Bridget Phillipson was really interesting when you got to the question about the two-child benefit cap, because that's where you see a perfect example of the problem. Right? There is no question that the Labour Party does not want to be a party that sees an increase in child poverty. Right? At the very heart of what it is, it must address that.
And the people like Gordon Brown, this is not a kind of left-right issue. It's people like Gordon Brown prominently saying they absolutely have to do this.
And a few weeks back, Rachel Sylvester, the political editor of The Observer, said, look, it was clear that they'd made the decision. Keir Starmer had spoken to Bridget Phillipson, spoken to Liz Kendall. They were going to go ahead. They were going to scrap the benefit cap, and they'd told, he'd told Rachel Reeves, that they needed to find a way of getting the money.
You're not giving away your journalist sources,
exactly, of getting the money. But that's the issue. The issue at the heart of what Labour faces is that, on the one hand, it has a fundamental problem in dealing with its inheritance on public services. Look at what we're talking about. How do you deal with the NHS? Look at what they're dealing with in defence. Look at what I'm sure we'll hear from Mark Rowley. Look what's happening in the police and the court system. These are all big funding issues. Daniel, I'm sure, has the same view around what's happening in education, teachers. So how do you find the money for public services? And at the same time, the second thing they're dealing with is people's real struggle in terms of cost of living. You need to get to growth, and that makes it much harder to raise taxes. And I just think that the issue we're going to face over the course of the summer is Labour making a call on itself. Are we going to kind of roll the pitch for tax rises? And how are you going to convince businesses and investors that Britain is a place for growth? Or are you going to make changes on public services and public sector reform? It's really profound.
And it's very, very difficult, unquestionably. But it was interesting in our voters in Kent we spoke to yesterday, several of them were saying, come on, give them more time. Not agreeing with the pile-on, James, as you described it. Susanna, what do you think are the chances, actually, of this time next year? Maybe the economy will be better, maybe waiting lists will carry on coming down, people might feel a bit cheerier, maybe some of those 1.5 million houses will have been built at last. What do you think?
People need to feel a change, don't they? Energy bills obviously need to come down as well. Inflation needs to come down. But also, as you say, that, public spending, they need to get a grip on it. The economy needs to grow. The growth forecast is not rosy, and people just need to feel like there is a direction that this government is going in. And currently, this government doesn't seem to know what direction it is going in and can't even persuade its own members to back it.
Daniel, what would you rate the chances of a turnaround as?
Well, what I would say is that you can't cut your way to economic growth, and this is the real issue.
They are spending tens and tens and tens and tens of billions of extra cash compared to what the Conservatives were.
Well, I mean, for example, within the welfare bill, there's still £2 billion worth of cuts that will, the changes to the universal credit payment for disabled people will lead to 700,000 more disabled people living in poverty. They are parents, so child poverty will continue to rise. We need real ambition from this government, a complete break with the economic consensus that sees wealth extracted from our communities to line the pockets of the wealthy.
Well, we will see what happens. It's certainly going to be an interesting 12 months. Let's turn our attention then to the official opposition. 367 days ago, if our arithmetic is right, he said cheerio. Remember him? Rishi Sunak, having sunk the election, was off. If that feels like another lifetime, well, you're probably not the only one. Shortly after his departure, a few months, it was Kemi Badenoch who won the Conservative crown. Mel Stride is our Shadow Chancellor, and he's with us this morning. Always good to have you with us in the studio. Now, we've had a bit of an audit, if you like, about how the government has got on. So, in fairness, we're going to have a bit of a look at some of the things that have happened to the Conservatives in the last few months. And we can start with a poll of polls. And this doesn't look very cheerful for you, really, because you've fallen off. It's even worse than at the general election last year. You're in third place routinely behind Labour and Nigel Farage. Let's then look at what happened to you the May local elections. You lost nearly 700 councillors, and Reform they're grabbing 677. That's got to hurt. And lastly, though, you have put forward some new policies under Kemi Badenoch, extending how long migrants must live in the UK before they can apply for citizenship, banning mobile phones for under-16s in schools, and giving prison officers lethal weapons in some circumstances. How would you rate this year for the Conservatives? So, Bridget Phillipson said 7 out of 10. What do you give yourself?
I think, as you've pointed out, Laura, we've started from a very low base. We had a very, very difficult general election result, the worst in our history. We had those local election results that were very difficult too. But we are building. And
so
the
if
way
you were
in which
1 out
we're
of 10
building,
then, where are you
well,
now?
can I just answer the question? So the way in which we're building is firstly to hold this government rigorously to account, and that is what the electorate sent us to Westminster to do. So when it's come to things like taxing farms, which they said they would never do, taking away the winter fuel payment that they said they would never do, when it's come to the welfare fast we've seen more recently, we have been holding the government to account, and in many cases U-turns have occurred.
So
the second thing we've got to do is to spend this time in opposition now to do the deep, hard yards of thinking around the kind of solutions that we can come forward with to some very deep challenges that our country has. And you've just been discussing some of those on the
and we have,
panel.
But let's think about this year, though, because Labour has said they give themselves 7 out of 10. You have got a hard task in front of you, but how would you rate how you've performed in this last 12 months?
So I think we have done a really good job at holding this government to account. So I think when it's come to things like what they've done to the economy, for example, where they said they wouldn't be putting up taxes left, right and centre, well, they put up taxes massively on businesses, which helped to destroy growth.
But will you give
They've
yourself a
stoked
report
inflation.
card?
Well, we have. Well, I'm not going to put scores on the doors. I'll leave that to your viewers to judge that. But I do think that we have been absolutely up and at this government, who have made a lot of very poor choices that have led to very low growth in our economy, higher inflation than we would have had, almost double what we had when we left office, higher interest rates than would otherwise be the case, a huge burgeoning national debt, the servicing costs of which are about 100 billion a year.
And
that's
you
twice
know,
what we spend on defence.
I know you don't like us pointing this out, but you know that when you criticise the economic performance of this government, lots of people scream at the telly that you left them a terrible, terrible mess. It's not just Labour politicians that say that.
On the day of the election, actually, Laura, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7. We had near record levels of employment, near
record levels of
low
tax,
levels of
and record levels of debt. But
we got inflation down to bang on target at 2%. It's
after
now
some terrible peaks. But let's not tangle over this. You and I have tangled over these things on many occasions.
Many challenges.
But I want to reflect on what our focus group said or in fact didn't say about Kemi Badenoch. When our moderator, Luke Trill, asked them how many of them had heard of or were aware of the Conservative leader, now there were some sort of tentative hands up, but if you look at other polling, it's very clear that for a lot of people, Kemi Badenoch, they might not even have heard of her, or it's still a bit of a mystery. Why do you think a lot of people just haven't yet kind of turned on to Kemi Badenoch or don't know who
Back to
she
where you
is?
started, Laura. We've just had a very punishing general election result and very difficult local election results.
But she's
And
the
it is
leader of
going
the
to
official
take time.
opposition.
It is
I mean, that's a big job.
It's going to take time to get a hearing and that connection with the electorate. But we will do that, firstly, by holding this government to account, and I've spoken a little bit about that, expressing our Conservative principles that we're doing along the way, but also doing that deep thinking about the real challenges that our country has, an ageing population, intergenerational unfairness, as you were discussing on the panel, how we get younger people on the housing ladder, how we get them to get the right skills, not saddled up with debt and into the right kind of jobs, and really participating in our country in that optimistic, upbeat way that our country can be when it's at its best. Now, there's not going to be a general election probably for another 4 years. So let's see where the polls are then, and let's see what the profile is of Kemi Badenoch at that point. That's the really important question.
Are you confident
We're
she'll
on a
still
journey
be there
and
by
we're making progress.
2029?
Sorry?
Are you confident she'll still be there by 2029?
Yes, absolutely. We have a united party and we will be going through to the general election under her leadership.
OK,
Yeah.
well, that's your prediction. Your party is saying today that it wants to stop foreigners getting access to some sickness benefits. How many foreign nationals get those benefits right now?
So what we know is that the cost, for example, of benefits into households where there is at least one foreign national living in that household is about £1 billion
But that's households,
per
that's
month.
a different thing.
About £1 billion per month. So what the actual amendment that we're coming forward to the welfare bill with is asking the government to do is to come forward with a discussion paper to look at this issue as to the benefits that are received by people who are British nationals and those who are foreign nationals living in our country.
But
And
you
I
don't
think
know,
that's
as things
important.
stand, how many people
I
this would
think,
actually
well, as
affect.
I say, what we know is that it's doubled over the last 3 years, and we know that the costs actually at a household level is about £1 billion per month, so about £12 billion per year. And what we're actually saying, just to be clear, Laura, is we're not coming forward with absolute nailed-down policy in this area. We just think that it's very important that this is an area that's properly looked at, and so our amendment is calling on the government to come forward with a discussion
So
document
this
on
isn't
that.
actually a settled plan. You're just saying to the government, please, we think we should have a look at this.
We think that it's really important that we do that. We think that it's also equally really important that when it comes to those higher level health-related benefits, where often mild anxiety or mild depression and so on are proving to be a route onto those benefits, that we should have a good, thorough look at that.
And you think
exactly
that's
as we
happening often,
did.
to use your word, often?
Yes. Well, when we were in power, actually, we brought in reforms to the work capability assessment that saved £5 billion and saw 450,000 fewer people, according to the OBR, not us, according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, going on to those long-term sickness and disability benefits.
But that's
because
interesting.
we believe,
You've said
Laura,
on the record it's often people with mild symptoms are going on to benefits.
We believe that, particularly when it comes to mental health, one of the best solutions to those kind of challenges is work. We are the party that believes in work, and we don't believe that welfare should trap people. We believe that welfare should be there for those that are vulnerable and need it, absolutely, and some people cannot work and should be looked after. There's an argument that says they should be looked after even more than they are now, but we do need to be encouraging and having a system that sees people going into work, not staying on benefits.
Some of your colleagues are trying out some pretty direct ways of doing their campaigning a bit differently. Robert Jenrick's been out filming people who are dodging fares, and your colleague Chris Phillips out filming people living in tents in London. Are you going to go out and film people with you telling them you think they don't deserve benefits?
We all have different things to highlight in our respective areas and different ways of going
so no
about it.
Selfie
well,
videos
what I have been doing is rigorously holding the government to account on the economy. The dismal situation we're now in, when we have about £6 billion worth of unfunded commitments, that and a slowing economy is almost certain to lead to increased taxes at the end of the year, and that is because of the choices that this government has taken.
Well, I've got a feeling we'll be talking about that rather a lot in the coming months. Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor, thanks for coming in. It's always good to have you with us. And we'll be talking to the Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davey, about his past year next week. Now then, making our streets safer was another of Labour's big promises. But when it came to funding for the police, there was a standoff, and the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, got rather less cash for the cops than she had hoped. Policing these days is increasingly complicated. Nearly 30 people were arrested in London yesterday at a protest backing the group Palestine Action. You'll probably remember that name because they broke into an RAF base at Brize Norton recently, and it's now treated as a terrorist organisation. Keeping order at demonstrations is just one of the things on the Met Police's long list of things they have to do, and its boss, Sir Mark Rowley, I'm pleased to say, is with us for the first time today. Welcome to the studio. Let's just briefly have a word about that protest yesterday. We saw some of the images from it this morning, including an 83-year-old female priest being taken away from a demonstration, having been holding a placard. Is that really a good use of police time?
The law doesn't have an age limit, whether you're 18 or 80. If you're supporting prescribed organisations, then the law's going to be enforced. Officers, you could see, did it with great care and tried to preserve that person's dignity, but they're breaking a serious law. Palestine Action have, over the last 18 months, have to be careful what I say because there's cases coming to trial. But some really serious criminal offences that they're accused of. There are millions of pounds worth of damage on multiple occasions. There are assaults. There are weapons used. This is not about protest. This is about an organisation committing serious criminality, and obviously the Home Secretary was persuaded by the papers on her desk to prescribe them. That law's come into force, and if people want to defy that law, then we have to enforce it.
OK, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming months with those cases that are going to court. One of the big pressures for the Met is policing protests. Almost every weekend, it seems, in central London. And you say you didn't get the money that you'd hoped for in the spending review, and you were already planning to cut 1,700 officers. So how many are you going to have to cut now?
So we've cut 1,600 over the last couple of years, another 1,700 officers and staff this year. That 3,300 out of an organisation, just over 40,000 is a big hit. And we're having to focus increasingly. The spending settlement, looking ahead, we haven't got all the details yet. I'm nervous about whether we'll be able to make ends meet with that. That's why I'm sort of calling today for sort of radical police reform to help us make the best use of the money we've got. Meanwhile, I've got officers on the streets who are determined day in and day out, and they're increasing the trust from the public. We've reduced neighbourhood crime this year so far by a fifth. That's things like burglary and robbery. We're detecting far more cases of shoplifting, far more cases of violence against women and girls. We've got a much lower murder rate than other big capital cities. Our teams are making fantastic progress, but that gets harder and harder without that focus and reform that we need.
And you say that you are nervous about what is going to happen, and you've warned you'll have to basically deprioritise some crimes. So what will you not investigate? What falls off the list?
So I don't want policing activity to fall off the list, and I know that the Mayor and the Home Secretary have pushed hard for the most police funding that we can get. We are determined to improve day in and day out experiences of Londoners on the streets. We can only do that if we focus ruthlessly on police work. When new recruits join, they expect they're going to spend most of their time protecting the public, enforcing the law, catching criminals. Within a couple of years, 80% of them are saying, I spend most of my time safeguarding the vulnerable. That's critical work, but that's not the core work of policing. So we need help to cut away some of these areas where other press public services have effectively pushed work to the police. There are 80,000 missing children from children's home a year in the country. That is really problematic. It also falls elsewhere. Policing of football matches across the country, mainly Premier League, cost policing £70 million. It doesn't get back from the football clubs. In London, it's more than a third of that. We should have more of a polluter pays approach. If you're running a profit-making event that, because of the nature of it, requires security, requires policing to support your security because of the criminality that's going to be experienced, why isn't the organiser paying for that rather than local communities who lose their resources to go to football matches?
So those are some of the ways, and you'd like to be able to basically push some of your workload off to other people or get more money from it. But many members of the public already feel that the police don't really care very much about what happens to them. They don't think having their phone nicked or having their car stolen is something that the police always follow up on. And, you know, here at the BBC, we've got countless messages from people who say, my phone was stolen, I told the police, I could see where it was on the tracker, and I told the police, and nothing happened. We've heard those same stories about people being able to know where their car is, and the police have closed the case and done nothing. And when you look at the stats, positive outcomes, so something happening when you report a crime, are down on mobile phone robbery. They're down when you look at theft from a person of mobile phones. The people feel often that you don't really care about the things that matter to them.
Those outcomes are up in London. So far this year, also the volume of those crimes is down by about a fifth. We've been running some big intensification periods on mobile phone crime. We've recovered thousands of mobile phones. We're arresting the teenagers who are stealing the phones. We're attacking the handling shops that are buying them off the teenagers, and we're also dealing with the National Crime Agency on some of the organised crime networks that's exporting them across the world. We also need help from the phone manufacturers and the companies behind them to actually make these goods less attractive, because they shouldn't be reusable as a stolen phone, but they are.
But what do you think it says to members of the public? And we know that there are so many of these stories when they report a crime and nothing happens.
So we use our resources to best effect, but I think there's a sort of rhetoric that you're sort of trying to reflect, Laura, which isn't accurate about trust in the police. 73% of the people in London in recent surveys run by City Hall trust the police. Only 12% have a negative view. The proportion having a negative view is lower than the proportion of the population that have a criminal record. So people are supportive of the police. Those numbers are rising because they can see how determinedly focused we are on protecting them and doing everything we can with the limited resources we have available.
One of your other ideas about using resources more effectively is you suggested there should be sort of mega forces. So at the moment there are 43
I think that's the Times
forces.
headline rather than my words.
So you don't want mega forces?
I wouldn't use the word mega.
Okay, but you want forces to get together, because right now in England and Wales there are 43 police forces. Now Labour tried to do this in 2006. Do you think there's a chance of this actually happening now? I mean, the government are looking at police reforms. There's a white paper, draft laws coming sometime soon. Do you think you've got a chance of making this happen?
I think it's essential. If we look at the spending on policing and public safety, from the 80s through to the noughties, it was a much higher level than it is today. Over the last decade or more, the proportion that governments are prepared to put to policing is much lower. I don't see that changing dramatically. So we've got to make the best use of every pound that governments can give to us, whatever political hue thereof. At the moment, there's this invisible spaghetti behind local police forces, which is sucking resources and cost. We have multiple national bodies leading operational functions. There are 2 leading technology functions. You've got West Midlands Police leads on ballistics intelligence, West Yorkshire Police lead on helicopters, the Met leads on some technical functions. It's a complete invisible spaghetti. Lots of the smaller forces can't actually do all the services locally, and they're having to club together and run complicated collaborations. All of this adds cost and complexity. If we had bigger local forces and one national body, you cut away a lot of that cost and waste, and you don't just strengthen national arrangements to deal with counter-terrorism and organised crime, but also you strengthen local policing, because you're removing all the waste behind them, so you can have more officers locally tackling the crimes that matter to local people.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the Home Secretary, whether or not she agrees with you, and I'm sure there'll be a big debate.
She's keen on police reform.
She is keen on this idea, you believe?
She's keen on police reform, and she's looking at the detail of what it will be.
OK. We are sadly running out of time. There's so much we could talk to you about, but I want to ask you about a very serious issue, because whatever the national picture is, the Met has struggled very badly to get its own house in order. And trust has been particularly damaged by high-profile cases like Wayne Couzens and David Carrick, police officers who committed appalling crimes against women. Now, the government has a target to have violence against women and girls, but for a time, you couldn't even get rid of officers on your own payroll who'd failed vetting checks. The law's been changed so you could do that. Have you now sacked all of those officers?
So the number of officers leaving the organisation has gone up by 4-fold compared to 3 or 4 years ago, through a combination of sacking them for misconduct cases, dealing with failing in vetting. So we're a long way through getting rid of cases.
Have you sacked them all?
We've sacked everybody that we can do on the process. There's lots more in train who are suspended pending hearings. this isn't just about me, this is about all the good people in the organisation who've stepped forward to take on the small minority of their colleagues who are undermining them. So we've made enormous progress. We've also closed the front door so that the vetting is much tighter when people come into policing. So you can be much more secure in terms of the officer who turns up to support you.
But are there officers currently working for the Met who are under investigation for violence against women and girls?
Of course there are officers under investigation, but if there's a serious... If we've got serious concerns about somebody, they're suspended.
But are there currently people working right now who are under investigation for violence against women and girls?
Not working on the streets. If you're under investigation for a serious offence, you're suspended, so that you're not dealing with the public. Okay. Clearly, we have to go through a legal process, but they're not on the streets.
Okay, so Mark Rowley, there's so much we could talk to you about. I hope you come back another time. It's been great to have you with
Laura,
us
thank you very much.
This morning on a Sunday. Right, we are zooming towards 10 o'clock. It's interesting that crime is an issue that matters so much to members of the public, but it hasn't necessarily caught fire in this last 12 months as a political issue. But Susanna, I wonder, this issue of public safety, it's not really something that's talked about very much in Westminster, but
it's something that viewers, Good Morning Britain, tell us about all the time, and you reflect the fact that often people feel if they are robbed or if their house is burgled, that they are not going to get a visit from the police. They might get a crime number, but they won't get an investigation. I feel for Mark Rowley, actually. I think he's doing probably the best job he can at the Metropolitan Police. And I think often there is a focus on the downside, the negatives. We, this week, spoke to the hero police officers who tackled that awful individual with the samurai sword in the attack last year in East London, where that poor young 14-year-old schoolboy was murdered. And officers every day put themselves in those situations. And in this case, not all of them had tasers, which would have brought that individual down sooner. So I think sometimes Mark Rowley must feel frustrated that the heroic work of police officers is overshadowed. But 20,000 police officers were cut under austerity and 20,000 backroom staff as well. They've been running to catch up.
And it's interesting to hear Sir Mark James talk about he is going to have to get rid of officers, and the political pressure is keep officer numbers high. People want to see police on the streets, but there's a bit of a mismatch there, isn't there?
So I thought if you listen to the kind of the course of the whole hour from that voter who said the government's pragmatic but tentative, through to Mel Stride saying we're not going to have an election for 4 years, I was sitting actually similar to you, Susanna, thinking, well, what is the human experience? What are people actually experiencing in this country? And actually, you've got to listen to Mark Rowley and think, well, there's a moment here where we can do things differently, not think day to day, week to week, but actually change over time. And actually, I think for us too, Laura, in journalism, one of the reasons why I think journalism is changing too is we're trying to get a sense of how people are experiencing things. The reason the Observer this week doesn't mark the year anniversary, but does this investigation into where the truth lies when it comes to this book, The Salt Path, or my colleague John Simpson, who's reported on what it's like being a witness in a rape trial and how many witnesses are falling out, is because I think that's really the job we have to do, is try and give people a sense of where change is coming and where it's failing to happen.
And Daniel, for you as a closing thought, where do you think the next 12 months might take us all?
Well, I just want to pick up on your point about doing things differently in regards to the police, because obviously yesterday we saw the 83-year-old woman who was carted off by police. I do think that police could perhaps do policing protests differently. This week I was contacted by a very senior executive member, former executive member, who was charged with attending a Palestine demonstration that laid flowers. We've seen a real clampdown on protest with the conspiracy to commit public nuisance. Arrests increasing tenfold, with only 3% leading to a prosecution. So I do really think that we should do things differently, because I'm very concerned about the clampdown on free speech and free expression.
That's another really interesting area that we haven't got time to go into in detail today, but it's been great having the three of you. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground, and really interesting to have your views as ever. Thank you for your time, and thank you for getting in touch. Let's have a look at some of your emails. Connie Alexander says the government, are acting like headless chickens, running around cutting winter fuel and welfare without thinking it through properly. John Hodge also isn't happy. He said, with Starmer, there's a fundamental sense of weakness with no clear decision-making. But Yvonne thinks, give him a break. People want quick fixes, and this is not going to happen. Major changes and improvements are not like fast food. Thank you to you for getting in touch. Thank you to my trio at the desk and to all our guests. And thank you to you, of course, most of all, for spending your Sunday morning with us. Thank you too today to our voters in Kent who gave up their time yesterday to share their verdicts on this now officially not so new government after a stormy 12 months that they could never have predicted. Labour, I think, would still not trade it for a single day out of power. But my goodness, they didn't think it would be like this. So what next? Stick with us every week to find out, and I'll see you next Sunday, same time, same place. Goodbye.